Lord of Wolves was once one of the strongest PvE weapons in Destiny 2, but is a prime example of a weapon that has been nerfed in PvE because of the impacts it had in the Crucible. This thing was busted, so much so that Evan made a video on it. But now that each sandbox is more divided, Lord of Wolves is getting some much needed love. Before the 6.2.5 update, the gun was in a pretty bad spot, but now that Lord of Wolves has been re-enabled, we'll be testing everything you need to know about these sandbox changes to determine if it's going to be meta inside of PvE. I'm Above, and if you enjoyed today's video, a like and subscription would be greatly appreciated. Now, let's get into it. For those who need a refresher, Lord of Wolves is an exotic energy shotgun with two alternate fire modes. The first is its standard mode that fires 5 bolts at a time with a pretty tight bullet spread. Calculating only headshots, the standard fire mode hits for 6,077 per bolt, and if we multiply this by 5 to account for each full burst, we hit for just over 30,000 damage. This weapon can fire 6 bursts in just 2.8 seconds, which equates to around 65,000 DPS over the first magazine, which is actually very good for a special weapon. This DPS number falls to around 25k, however, once you reload and empty the second magazine. The second fire mode is called Release the Wolves. When active, it still shoots 5-round bursts, but increases the weapon's fire rate, reload speed, and damage at the expense of the weapon's accuracy, which is where the PvP nerfs hit the hardest. Because as you can see, with Release the Wolves active, the recoil pattern is basically unusable. The pre-buff number hit for 6,461 per shot, which is a lowly 6.3% increase over the standard fire mode. Using the same math as before, one magazine will deal just under 194,000 total damage with Release the Wolves active. It takes 2.33 seconds to fire a single magazine, which equates to 83,000 DPS. After reloading and shooting 2 magazines, that number drops to 34,000, which is higher than its normal fire rate if you're able to hit all crits, which is almost impossible without something like a divinity bubble applied. Now let's check the numbers after the buff. We'll be focusing on Release the Wolves because it's the only portion of the weapon that's changed, and the buffs are significant. As stated in the TWAB, the increased spread meant that it was difficult to land critical hits, even on large targets, without having to be dangerously close to them. In content where extra damage matters, this could often be a lethal experience, so we have reduced the accuracy penalty by 70%. You're now looking at the post-patch recoil pattern, which, as they alluded to in the patch notes, definitely makes this weapon significantly more usable. But without the damage to back it up, the ease of use doesn't matter all that much, which is where the rest of the buffs come into play. Though Bungie removed the 25% universal damage buff, they replaced it with a 40% PvE damage buff in its place, so to keep this simple, just think of this as a 15% buff overall. They also removed a 50% crit multiplier penalty, which is by far the most significant change. When testing Release the Wolves on that same Lost Sector boss after the patch, each bolt hit for 8,508 damage, which means each burst now hits for 42.5k total, up from 32,000 damage before the patch, which is a 32% buff to its crit damage overall. This damage buff transfers to all of our previous calculations, so the 1 mag DPS is now 109,000 and the 2 mag DPS is now 45,000. Now, it's still not the easiest weapon to hit all headshots with, but it's significantly easier than it was before. With that said, Divinity is a popular option nowadays, so hitting those crits shouldn't be too much of an issue. This could be a go-to option to pair with linear fusion rifles, since you can use them for any sustained damage phases and then swap to Lord of Wolves for any burst damage scenarios, which is where this weapon shines. You can use this to melt through champs or other high-value targets while saving your ammo for boss phases. Let's compare this to other popular close-range options. First up, we have Heritage, which can hold 12 in the magazine with Reconstruction active. Heritage hits for 40,157 per shot, and it takes 9.5 seconds to fire a full Reconstruction magazine. Its total damage is 481,884, with its DPS coming in just under 51,000, which is under half of what Lord of Wolves can do. Even if you add the 36k bonus damage from recombination on the first shot, the DPS is still only 54,500, which is still half that of the Lord of Wolves. Now, let's compare Lord of Wolves to its most similar counterpart, the Fourth Horseman. We used Divinity to test damage since hitting all 5 shots as crits is even harder than Lord of Wolves is, but don't worry though, we removed the 30% div damage buff from the calculations. Fourth Horseman hits for a total of 172,058 damage in under a second, meaning the DPS number is 215,000. This drastically falls off to 30,724 with a reload and second mag included, meaning its initial burst damage does much better than Lord of Wolves, yet anything past the first mag is significantly worse, unless you're on something like a Hunter where you can use a reload dodge. So, where does Lord of Wolves stand after the update? What's the point of this weapon? Well, to me, on the surface level, it appears to be a very solid option in endgame content, but I don't think it's the meta option for anything. It's something that's flexible with high burst damage and decent total damage, but it doesn't do anything the best. Fourth Horseman is going to be your go-to option for burst damage if you're really going that route, and linears are just so strong in endgame content at the moment that it's hard to beat their utility. You could see this weapon used on short-range bosses such as Morgeth, Caretaker, and Keitel, but even in those situations, linears are probably going to be the better option. With that said, it's much more usable than before, and this buff is a massive upgrade for the weapon overall. Anyways, guys, I hope you enjoyed the video, and this answered some questions you guys may have had about the buff. I hope you guys enjoyed, and if you did, a like and subscription would be greatly appreciated. I also stream over on Twitch at twitch.tv/abub, so feel free to swing by the stream, and until next time, I hope you all stay safe, and I'll see you in the next one.